David, I know this is wrong. I know we shouldn't. But just for tonight, please, can't we just have tonight? Her whisper was a breath against my lips, so close I could feel the warmth of it. And her next words, they stopped my heart. I'm, I'm completely soaked. In that moment, I stopped breathing, and I finally, irrevocably, crossed the line. Her shirt clung to her skin, darkened by the rain, and my hand moved as if it had a will of its own, slowly tracing a path upward. The touch was so soft it stole the air from my lungs, and my mind, which had been wrestling with doubt for hours, simply went quiet. There was no more room for hesitation. A single candle flickered on the table between us, and with every gust of wind that rattled the old cabin, our shadows danced on the wall, merging and separating in the deep darkness. My lips found the curve of her wet shoulder, and a soft, trembling sigh escaped her as she pulled me closer. Outside, a storm was tearing through the Michigan woods, a gale strong enough to rip shingles from the roof. The window panes shuddered in their frames. But inside that small, isolated shelter, a far more dangerous and powerful tempest was raging. Anyone could see it was a line that should never be crossed, a moment that should never be spoken of. So why, then, did we, a man and his wife's younger sister, crave the very air between us with such a desperate ache? That night, one single kiss brought everything crashing down. It had all started just a few days earlier. The whole family had driven up north for our annual summer vacation, renting a large cabin on the shores of Lake Michigan. As I hauled our suitcases from the car at the airport, I remember glancing up at the sky. It was heavy with dark, bruised-looking clouds. I should have known then it was an omen. We arrived at the rental cabin around 4 in the afternoon. It was a beautiful, rustic place, set back from the road in a thick grove of pine trees. The second floor was a large loft for the family, while the ground floor held the living room and kitchen. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and for a while, the sound of laughter and the distant cries of gulls made it feel like a real escape, a much-needed rest. But even surrounded by family, I felt a familiar loneliness creeping in. My wife, Carol, was, as always, a whirlwind of efficiency. She was already unpacking, her movements sharp and precise. She pushed a box with her knees, her back ramrod straight, and folded towels into perfect, crisp squares. Every gesture seemed wound with a quiet tension. "David, I told you not to leave this here," she said in a low voice, moving the bag I'd just set down. I picked it up again without a word. Our marriage was stable, predictable, but after 20 years it was also deeply tiring. Just then, a light touch on my arm made me turn. "Hey, David," a bright voice said. "They ordered pizza. You better get a slice before my mom eats it all." It was Sarah, Carol's younger sister, a wide, genuine smile on her face. She was an elementary school teacher, and since she was on summer break, she'd joined us for the trip. In the midst of all the quiet family tension, she was the only one who seemed to bring any real warmth, any real laughter. Sarah's smile was nothing like her sister's. There was an ease in the way she spoke, a freedom in her every movement that Carol had lost years ago, if she ever had it at all. I was aware of this difference, of course, but I never imagined it would become the first crack in the foundation of my life. That evening, after a barbecue by the lake, the family gathered in the living room, sharing stories and sipping wine. Carol, claiming she was tired, went up to bed early. One by one, our parents followed suit. Soon it was just me and Sarah. I sat quietly, finishing my beer, while she was curled up on the couch next to me, typing something on her laptop. "Just have to finish up some lesson plans for the school board," she explained, not looking up. I have to do a presentation for all the parents this year. Sounds tough, I said, my voice neutral. Teaching little kids can't be easy. My words were casual, but my eyes kept drifting to her hands, to the long, graceful fingers flying across the keyboard. She paused and finally looked up at me. Do you like kids, David? The question was so direct, so unexpected, that I had to look away. Well, I don't dislike them, no. Sarah nodded, a small, thoughtful smile playing on her lips. Carol can't stand them. That's why I always thought it was, I don't know, sweet that you seem to like them. It always made you seem so warm. Her words weren't just a compliment. They were a quiet acknowledgement of a difference between me and my wife, and for some reason, it sent a strange, light feeling through my chest. It was the first tremor. Later that night, alone in the bathroom, I noticed something on the edge of the sink. Sarah's hair tie. It was just a simple pink elastic band, but as I picked it up, I could swear I caught the faint, clean scent of her shampoo. I held it for a moment before slowly setting it back down. Standing there in the silent cabin, I realized my heart was beating just a little too fast. That was the moment she stopped being just my sister-in-law. That was the moment I started to see her as a woman. The next morning, I woke to the sound of wind whistling through the pines outside my window. Through a gap in the curtains, I could see tree branches whipping back and forth, a frantic, unsettling dance. Down in the kitchen, my mother-in-law had the radio on, and an announcer's grave voice was issuing a severe storm warning for the entire region. Sarah was still on the floor, trying to finish her work. She was hunched over her laptop, her hair falling into her face, so focused she hadn't even taken the time to tie it back. It was such a normal, everyday scene, yet I couldn't pull my eyes away. I tried to look elsewhere, but the image of a single drop of sweat tracing a path down the nape of her neck was seared into my mind. By 3 in the afternoon, the wind had become a roar. Carol was anxiously refreshing the weather app on her phone, while her father was on a call with the cabin's owner. He hung up, his face grim. "David, we have to go," he said. "The owner says we need to evacuate to the town's community center. This place is too deep in the woods. It's not safe." Everyone scrambled to pack. We had to move coolers, bags of food, suitcases, everything. I was sweating by the time I helped our parents into the car. By 6 o'clock, as the first drops of rain began to fall, we had all made it to the shelter. As Carol was doing a head count, Sarah suddenly gasped. "Oh no, wait, my laptop. I left my laptop at the cabin." Everyone froze. I looked at her and asked, my voice carefully neutral, "Do you really need it right now?" Her eyes were wide with panic as she nodded. "Yes, all my files for the presentation are on it. The lesson plans, the slideshow. Everything is saved on that computer." Carol's voice was tight with suppressed anger. "Why would you leave it there, Sarah? You know how dangerous it is to go back out there now." Sarah looked close to tears, wringing her hands. "I'll go by myself. I can be quick. I know right where it is." She started to turn back toward the door. In that instant, without thinking, I stepped in front of her. "I'll go with you. You shouldn't go alone." Carol grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "What are you doing? David, have you seen the wind out there? It's not a joke." But I kept my face calm, my voice steady. "We'll be quick. It's only a 10-minute drive. She won't be able to relax until she has it, and we'll be safer once we're back." Carol, unable to argue with that logic, finally let go. Sarah and I pulled on thin rain slickers, wrapped plastic bags over our boots, and headed back out into the storm. The rain was coming down in sheets now, the road slick and dark. Sarah held a flashlight, trying to pierce the gloom, and she walked so close to me that her arm was pressed against mine for balance. "I'm so sorry, David," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I didn't mean to cause all this trouble." I just shook my head. "It's fine. It's actually pretty impressive you're still thinking about work in the middle of all this." She managed a weak, grateful smile. "I'm just really glad you're here to help." With every step, the distance between us seemed to shrink, not just physically, but in some other unspoken way. By the time we reached the cabin, the wind was so strong it felt like a physical force pushing against us. The rain slickers were useless, plastered to our bodies. As soon as I unlocked the front door, we both stumbled inside, gasping for breath, soaked to the bone. Sarah immediately spotted her laptop on the living room table and let out a sigh of relief, turning to me with a grateful look. "Thank God, it's right here." I nodded, my gaze catching on a single drop of rain tracing a path from her forehead down her cheek. It looked almost like a tear. I quickly looked away. "Okay, let's get back right away. We can't stay here long in this wind." But when I opened the door again, the world outside had changed. A massive pine tree had fallen across the narrow lane leading back to the main road, completely blocking our path. The ditch beside it was already overflowing, a rushing torrent of muddy water. The moment I stepped off the porch, water surged past my knees. I pulled out my phone, but the screen just read "no service." Just then, the cabin's emergency power flickered and died, plunging us into absolute darkness. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, her voice trembling. "David, we can't get out, can we? It's too dangerous." I scanned our surroundings, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the blackness, and made a decision. "You're right. We can't. We'll have to wait it out. We'll leave at dawn, after the storm passes. It's the only safe thing to do." The cabin was utterly silent, except for the drumming of rain on the roof and the rattling of the windows. I found a small candle in a kitchen drawer and lit it, placing it on the dining table. Its tiny flame cast a warm, flickering glow across the room. Sarah was trying to dry her hair with a towel, but water was still dripping from the ends, soaking the shoulders of her t-shirt. I tried not to stare, but as she wrapped the towel around her head, the elegant, vulnerable curve of her neck caught my eye, and I couldn't look away. "The hot water probably isn't working, is it?" she asked. I shook my head. "The power's out completely, but I found a couple of sleeping bags in the closet. Let's just try to get dry and warm." I unrolled one for her, and she slipped inside it cautiously. I didn't light another candle. Instead, I sat on the couch across from her, leaving the single flame between us. And for the first time, the two of us were truly alone, sharing a quiet, intimate space. Sarah hugged the sleeping bag to her chest and looked at me, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. "Are you scared, David?" I managed a small smile. "Not scared. A little on edge, maybe." She nodded. "I'm a little scared. The sound of the wind. And I've never been in a situation like this before." Her voice trailed off. She stared into the flame for a long moment before speaking again, her voice much softer. "David, have you ever regretted marrying my sister?" The question caught me so off guard that I felt my eyebrows knit together. But her expression was completely serious. This wasn't a casual question. It felt like something she had been holding on to for a very long time. "Why would you ask that?" She hesitated for a second. "It's just, you always seem like you're walking on eggshells around her, like you're watching your every move." I didn't answer right away. I couldn't understand why her words hit me so hard, why they felt so painfully true. In that space, there was no one else. Outside, a hurricane was raging. Inside, there was only silence, punctuated by the slow, steady sound of our breathing. Finally, I let out a long, quiet sigh. I've never regretted it. She's a good person. Carol is smart, and she's responsible. Sarah looked down, her voice barely a whisper. But was it because you loved her? I had no answer for that. I couldn't say a word. The candle flame swayed, and in its unsteady light, our shadows on the wall seemed to twist and tangle together. That night, something between us began to crack, something that could never be repaired. The small space, protected by a single flame, felt quieter than I could have imagined, and more suffocatingly close. I sat on the couch, my arms resting on my knees, while Sarah was propped against the wall, tucked inside her sleeping bag. The silence stretched between us, as long and heavy as the storm outside. Every time the wind battered the windows, I saw her shoulders flinch, and with every small movement, my attention was drawn back to her. Then, her voice, soft and careful, broke the quiet. "Are you happy with her, David? With Carol?" I turned my head, and I know she saw the surprise in my eyes. But this time she didn't look away. Her gaze was steady, searching. "Why do you keep asking things like that?" I asked, my voice low. "I'm just curious," she replied. "Because I think today was the first time I've ever really seen you smile." Her words silenced me completely. I had nothing to say to that. As the silence settled again, she hugged her knees to her chest and whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, "What do you think of me, David?" I narrowed my eyes. I could feel the weight of that question, the sheer gravity of it. "I think you're a good person, Sarah. You're kind, you're bright. You're dedicated to your students." "That's what everyone says." She cut in, her voice thin. She took a shaky breath. "Don't you know how I see you?" I looked down at my hands. There was no escaping this now. I could feel it closing in. Her fingers were clenched around the edge of her sleeping bag, and I saw her bite her lip. Then she looked up, her eyes shining in the dim light. "I've had a crush on you since I was a kid, David." My world tilted. It wasn't a complete shock. Maybe some small part of me had always known. But hearing her say it, here, now, in this place, it changed everything. "From the very first day Carol brought you home to meet us. From that day until now, I've never been able to just look away. I always find myself watching you, thinking about you." She stopped, her voice breaking, and she lowered her head. I could see the glint of tears in her eyes. "I know I shouldn't be saying this," she whispered. "I know it's wrong, but I feel like if I don't say it tonight, right here, I'll never be able to say it at all." I listened, but I couldn't form a reply. Carol's face flashed in my mind, the reality of my marriage, of my life. But the image of Sarah, sitting just a few feet away, her heart laid bare, was so much more vivid, so much more real. The little candle was almost gone now, its flame sputtering. The room grew darker with each passing second, and in the encroaching shadows, our silhouettes seemed to lean closer, to overlap. Finally, I found my voice. "I knew," I said, the words feeling heavy and strange on my tongue, "and I've been trying to run from it ever since." Sarah's eyes widened. She pressed her lips together, saying nothing. And in that moment, the storm raging inside the cabin was fiercer than anything happening outside. The candle was about to go out. The tiny flame trembled, fighting for a moment, and then a draft snuffed it out completely. The room was plunged into an absolute, profound darkness. We sat there, neither of us speaking, surrounded by the storm and the blackness. I tried to hold on to the silence, to keep my composure, but a heat was rising from deep within me, something I could no longer contain. Sarah's confession echoed in my ears, and I could almost feel her trembling across the room. And then I heard it, a soft rustle. Sarah was slowly, deliberately, getting to her feet. The sound of the sleeping bag sliding away, the whisper of her bare feet on the wooden floor. She was coming toward me, one step, and then another. When I felt her presence and lifted my head, she was standing silently before me. I could feel the warmth of her, hear the unsteadiness of her breath. Her hand came to rest gently on my knee. "David," she whispered, a plea and a question all in one. "I know this is wrong. I know we shouldn't. But just for tonight. Please, can't we just have tonight?" And then her voice dropped even lower. I'm completely soaked." Before she even finished the sentence, my heart hammered against my ribs. Her hand slid from my knee up my thigh, and my own hand shot out to catch it. No words were spoken. None were needed. In the darkness, we understood everything through the sound of our breathing alone. I pulled her down toward me, my arms circling her waist, and she melted into my embrace without resistance. Our lips met. It started tentatively, a soft exploration, but it quickly deepened into something fierce and desperate. Her lips, damp from the rain, were warmer than I ever could have imagined, and my last thread of reason snapped. My fingers slipped beneath the hem of her damp t-shirt, and I felt her whole body jolt with a shiver. A broken gasp escaped her lips, and I traced a line of kisses down her neck, pulling her impossibly closer. Our bodies tumbled onto the couch cushions, a tangle of limbs and desperation. She didn't call me David. She whispered my name, but it was the way she said it, not as her brother-in-law, but as a man, that shattered my resolve. In that small cabin, the wind, the thunder, the darkness, it all disappeared. There was only the searing heat between us. A silent understanding passed between us, an acceptance of what was about to happen. Our damp clothes were peeled away, piece by piece, and in the oppressive darkness, skin met skin. Amid shuddering breaths, I held her, and she, with her lips pressed tightly together, accepted me without a word. Sister-in-law, brother-in-law. Those names, those roles, they had no meaning in that moment. That night, we found a desperate solace in each other, and in doing so, we crossed a line from which there would be no return. Slowly, the heat between us began to fade. The fire that had consumed us moments before was now cooling on the damp sheets, leaving a chill in its wake. I lay beside her, my breathing still ragged, my head resting near her hair. Sarah had an arm thrown over her face, her lips parted but silent. She just lay there, her eyes closed, perfectly still. We both knew what had just happened, and we both knew with a terrifying certainty what it meant. The heavy weight of reality began to press down on us, growing more suffocating with every second of silence that passed. I was the first to move. I sat up, grabbing my damp shirt and pulling it on. My eyes fell on our discarded rain slickers and boots, scattered on the floor like evidence of a crime. Sarah sat up too, quietly. Her lips were red and swollen, and she kept her gaze fixed on the floor. It was then that we heard it, a voice from outside, muffled by the door. "Hello? Anyone in there? This is the county search and rescue." In an instant, we both froze, our breath catching in our throats. I looked at Sarah, and her wide, terrified eyes met mine. "David," she whispered, her voice laced with panic. "What do we do?" I shook my head slowly. There were no excuses, no escape routes. I knew that already. We dressed in a frantic, clumsy haste. As we moved toward the door, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in a dark window pane. My face was etched with exhaustion, and Sarah's eyes were bloodshot and raw. "We're in here," I yelled, my voice hoarse. The door opened, and two men in uniform stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. "Are you two all right? Your family was worried sick when you didn't come back and we couldn't get a signal." I just nodded. Sarah kept her head bowed, her hair hiding her face, saying nothing. We sat side by side in the back of the rescue vehicle as it navigated the debris-strewn road back to the community center. It was 4 in the morning. The wind had died down, but the woods were a wreck of fallen trees and broken branches. Carol was waiting at the entrance. The moment she saw me, she ran over. "Are you insane?" she cried, her voice sharp with a mixture of relief and fury. "Why didn't you call? What were you two thinking? Staying out there all night?" I couldn't meet her eyes. I had no answers to give. Her gaze shifted to Sarah, who walked past us without a word, her head still down. In that moment, and in all the moments that followed, Sarah and I never once looked at each other. But deep in my chest, I could still feel the ghost of her touch, the memory of her skin against mine under the flickering candlelight, as vivid and real as if it were happening all over again. Carol grabbed my arm again. "What happened in there? Why do you both look like that?" Instead of answering, I gently pulled my arm from her grasp and walked away. We returned to the city from our vacation on the last day, arriving home around 5 in the evening. I dragged the suitcases through the front door of our apartment while Carol went ahead, flipping on lights with a familiar, practiced motion. Everything was exactly as we had left it. My sneakers from the day we left were still by the door. The dishes from our last breakfast were still in the sink. But that very familiarity felt utterly alien to me now. It felt like that night in the cabin had changed everything. My wife's voice, her touch, the way she looked at me, it all felt distant, like I was seeing a stranger. Carol, ever the pragmatist, was already planning her week. "Back to work first thing tomorrow. It's going to be a busy one." I just nodded, my face a blank mask. I heard her words, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, lost in the memory of Sarah's voice. Asterisk just for tonight. I'm completely soaked. Asterisk that whisper, the tremble in her breath, the feel of her skin. It was all still there, a phantom sensation at my fingertips. I stood at the living room window, staring out at nothing, a mug of coffee in my hand. I took a sip, but I couldn't taste a thing. A few weeks later, there was another family gathering. It was my mother-in-law's birthday, and we all met for dinner at a restaurant. I was running late and arrived to find Carol already seated. Sarah was there too, tucked into a corner at the far end of the table. She was staring down at her phone, and when I walked in, her eyes flickered up to meet mine for a fraction of a second before darting away again. I deliberately turned my head, avoiding her gaze. We were both trying so hard not to look at each other, and the air between us crackled with a tension that no one else seemed to notice. "How's work been, David?" Sarah asked at one point, her voice stiff and unnatural. "Fine. Same as always," I replied, my answer just as clipped. That was the extent of our conversation. We didn't need words. Too much had already been said in the silence. We were both on guard, terrified that a single glance might betray everything. After dinner, as we were leaving, Carol stepped away to take a phone call. Sarah started walking toward the parking garage alone. On pure instinct, I followed her. In the dim, quiet space between two parked cars, we finally faced each other. We said nothing, but in the shared glance, all the feelings from that night came rushing back. "Have you been okay?" I asked, my voice low. Sarah bit her lip and nodded, but her eyes told a different story. Ever since that night, she began, her voice trailing off. I know, I said softly. Me too. A heavy silence fell between us. In the distance, I could hear Carol's footsteps approaching. Sarah quickly looked away and hurried off. I stood there, frozen, unable to move, long after she was gone. The space she had occupied felt heavy with all the things we couldn't say. That night in the storm, it simply refused to be erased. Lately, I'd been spending more and more time in front of the bathroom mirror. I'd just stand there, holding my electric razor, staring at my own reflection, my mind a complete blank. Carol had started to notice. She would watch me silently, her eyes narrowed, until one day she finally asked, "You've been acting strange. You're always a million miles away. Is something wrong?" I shook my head and said no, but I couldn't meet her gaze, and I knew she saw it. Dinner became a silent affair. We used to talk, at least a little, but now the only sound was the clinking of our forks against the plates. One evening, Carol put her fork down with a sharp clatter. "If we're going to live like this," she said, her voice cold, "I don't see the point in even eating together." I said nothing. I didn't know what to say, what expression to wear. My mind was once again filled with the sound of Sarah's breathing, the memory of her hand on my chest, the heat of her body through her wet clothes, and the look in her eyes, the way she had looked at me not as her sister's husband, but as a man. Couldn't erase it. Or maybe the truth was I didn't want to. Meanwhile, Sarah was struggling too. She told me later that she couldn't focus at school. She'd be writing on the blackboard and suddenly freeze, lost in a memory of my lips on her neck, the sound of my voice, the roughness of my hands, her own ragged breaths. She said it was all as real as if it were happening again. She started spending her afternoons in coffee shops, unable to go straight home, just staring out the window at nothing. Since that night, she couldn't bring herself to be with anyone else. The man who had been her brother-in-law now occupied the very center of her heart. My own focus at work was gone. I'd zone out during meetings, giving nonsensical answers to my boss's questions. My colleagues would joke about it. "What's with you, David? You in love or something?" I couldn't even manage a smile in response. I didn't know if it was love, but I knew one thing for certain. I spent far more time thinking about Sarah than I did with my own wife. One evening, Carol tried again. "David," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Something has changed between us, hasn't it?" I was speechless, my lips dry. She studied my face for a long moment, her eyes sharp and knowing, before she stood up and walked into our bedroom, closing the door behind her. The click of the latch sounded unnaturally loud in the silent apartment. Even then, I just sat there, my eyes closed, unable to move. A moment later, my phone buzzed. A single text message. It was from Sarah. "Are you okay?" My chest tightened, and I gripped the phone in my hand. I didn't reply, but that one short question echoed in my head all night. Later, lying in bed next to Carol, I closed my eyes, but it was another woman's warmth I felt, another woman's presence that filled my senses. The word husband felt like a hollow shell, a role I was no longer fit to play. It was the first time we had seen each other since the birthday dinner. I had been avoiding going out, and Sarah had been skipping family events. We were trying to stay away from each other, but we couldn't erase the memory of what had happened. One Saturday afternoon, I stopped at a coffee shop near my office. I just didn't want to go home. As I opened the door, my eyes landed on a woman sitting by the window. Her long hair was swept to one side, a book open in front of her. My feet stopped moving. It was Sarah. She looked up, her eyes widening in surprise as she recognized me. Our gazes locked for a heartbeat before she quickly looked down, closing her book. I hesitated, then walked over and sat down in the chair across from her. No words came at first, but the silence that hung between us was heavier, more charged, than any conversation we'd ever had. "Do you come here often?" I asked finally, just to break the tension. She nodded, managing a faint smile. "It's near the school. I come here when I need to think." I nodded back, though I wasn't really listening. My entire focus was on her, her eyes, her lips, the way her fingers rested on the table. "Have you been okay?" she asked cautiously. I met her gaze. I could see all the complicated emotions swirling in her eyes, because they were the same ones I felt. "I've been getting by," I admitted. "But, okay? I'm not so sure." We both looked away, fiddling with our coffee cups. Then, her voice low and steady, she said, "I've thought about that night, every single day." I took a sharp breath. Carol's face flashed in my mind, but it was immediately replaced by the image of Sarah's cheek, damp with rain. "Me too," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. "I keep replaying it in my head. I try to push it away, but it won't go." Her eyes filled with tears. "But we can't do this, David. We both know it's wrong. So why can't I stop thinking about it? Why do I miss you so much?" I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. It was trembling. "I know," I said. "I know it's wrong, but my heart doesn't seem to care." The touch was brief. She slowly pulled her hand away, but we both felt the warmth linger. After a long moment of silence, she bit her lip and asked the question that hung between us. "Are you going to tell her? Tell Carol?" I looked down, thinking for a long time. Then, with a sense of quiet resolve, I looked back at her. "No," I said. I'm going to tell her." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "Really?" I nodded slowly. I could keep running, keep hiding, but I knew it would only make things worse, make the wound deeper. "Hiding it feels crueler than the truth," I said. Her face was a mask of anguish. She lifted her cup but didn't drink. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the room, stretching our silhouettes until they touched. The feelings we had tried to bury were rising to the surface again. And this time, neither of us had any intention of running away. I woke up before dawn. The room was still dark, and Carol was sleeping soundly beside me. I looked at her profile in the dim light and let out a long, silent sigh. What I had once believed was love now felt like little more than a duty. That one night with Sarah had shaken the very foundations of my life. At first, I tried to deny it. Then I tried to escape it. But I had finally reached a point where I could no longer hide from the truth. I went to the living room and opened my laptop. I stared at the blank white screen, typing and deleting the words, "I'm sorry," over and over again. Just then, my phone lit up with a new message. It was from Sarah. I'm gonna tell her today. I'm scared, but I can't hide it anymore. Asterisk. I stared at her words for a long time. Finally, I stood up and pulled back the curtains, letting the first rays of morning light flood the room. Sarah stood outside her parents' house for a long time before she finally rang the doorbell. When Carol opened the door, Sarah found that all the words she had practiced had vanished. She just stood there, silent. "What is it?" Carol asked, her expression puzzled. "What's wrong?" Sarah took a step forward, tears already welling in her eyes. "Carol, I have to tell you something. And I am so sorry. Carol's face hardened. She knew. At the same time, I was sitting in my car in the office parking lot. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. I rested my hands on the steering wheel, whispering the words I needed to say over and over. There's something I have to tell you. That night in Michigan. I closed my eyes, and it all came rushing back. The sound of Sarah's breathing, the scent of her skin, the look in her eyes. Finally, I took out my phone and sent a text to Carol. Asterisk, can we make some time to talk tonight? There's something I have to tell you. It's too heavy for me to carry alone anymore. Asterisk. My hand felt impossibly heavy as I pressed the send button. That evening, the sky was overcast and gray. It wasn't raining, but the humid air was thick with a heavy stillness, the kind of quiet that comes right before a storm breaks. Sarah sat in front of her mirror. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she wore no makeup. She knew that today, any kind of artifice was meaningless. The woman staring back at her was not a sister or a daughter, but simply a woman, her eyes shadowed by the weight of an irreversible choice. I stood outside my own front door, my keys in my hand. I squeezed them tightly, taking one last, deep breath. I knew that once I opened this door, nothing would ever be the same again. This feeling, this connection that I could no longer justify, even in the name of love, I was done hiding it. That night, in two different places, two different confessions were about to begin. The emotion that had been born in the heart of one storm was about to unleash another, far more devastating one.